In this video, I'm going to go over a little bit more information about the specifics of the project, as well as show you some sample projects that have been done over the semesters. So the project information folder has a number of files in here, and so at any time you're able to switch your project topic, but you do have to run it by me first. So, if you have mentioned a project with me in advance that we've talked about and you want to change it, that's totally okay. Just send me an email with your updated project and I'll let you know if there's any potential issues with it. So if you either don't like your project topic or if you are still kind of finding something that you want to do your project on, there is a sample of each test. Well, most of them. There's a sample for almost all of our hypothesis tests that we do, including the ones in Unit 5 that we haven't covered yet, as well as all of the tests that you'll be running if you did a sample project of that nature. So you can't borrow one of these exactly, but there's going to be lots and lots of similar things that you can do your project on. So first I wanted to look at some sample projects, and then we'll go back and look at them in a little bit more detail. The project that I've included do not have anything to do with correctness. It's just in general for an idea of length, as well as what your posters should look like visually. So this got an A in visual presentation, so there's a part on the rubric that has nothing to do with any of your content. It just has to do with whether your project is professional. So this one, all the lines are straight and everything is typed up. This one got a definitely less than an A because we're not cut in straight squares and stuff like that. But in general, no handwritten stuff is one of the biggest things. When you look at the poster, it doesn't look good. So this one had a bunch of handwritten stuff, but otherwise, was decent looking. This one was very good visually appealing wise and correctness, but you can't read any of these specifics, which is good because I don't want you to go through and kind of just borrow from someone else's projects. This one looked good, and this one looked pretty good as well. So just to give you an idea, it should all fit on a poster. There should not be a ton of writing. The point is to be concise. Say what you need to say and without getting into too much else. Some people are going to have lengthier explanations in their conclusion and maybe their introduction, but in general, it should fit on a regular poster-sized board. So I'm actually going to go through the rubric version of this. For the most of this because the rubric is general just a bolded version of this long written version. So the introduction is going to be English paper style. You are going to formally state the claim you will be testing in here at some point. So for example, if I'm looking at comparing the average wind in Chicago versus Wyoming, I would say something to the effect of the researcher is interested in determining if the wind speed in Chicago is less than the wind speed in Wyoming. So notice that in that I didn't say the word I at all. It's very unprofessional to say that in any field at all, so you should be avoiding the word I. And also you're not going to mention at this point what kind of test you're running. You're just going to say what your HO and your H1 are. So that's just setting up in general what you are going to be doing. You haven't done anything yet. So I would say this claim will be tested under, it would be a population mean test because I'm going to have wind speeds for maybe a few years randomly selected somehow in a perfect world. But a lot of your samples may be convenience samples and that is okay. So I would say my HO is that the mean for Chicago, the wind speed is less than the mean wind speed for Wyoming. Or maybe I want to just look at Casper. I don't know if it's a fair comparison to look at a state versus a city. And then my HO would be that they're not equal. My H1 would be that they are. The Chicago wind speed is less than. So data collection, lots of you guys will be doing convenient samples, and this is okay. I'm going to go over how to make a survey in Google Forms. I don't recommend using SurveyMonkey because after a while, 100 specifically, you're going to need to use a paid account in order to get the rest of your survey data. So I don't recommend using that because, you know, if you're going to just post a link somewhere, you might as well get the biggest sample size that you can. Again, it is totally okay if it is a convenient sample. You just need to make sure that you state that in your project. So over here for data collection, you need to state your population specifically. So if you're doing a Facebook survey, you're going to say, you know, the population is the researchers' Facebook friends. And if you do as, you know, that as well as maybe something at Casper College, you should say your Facebook friends as well as Casper College students. So, you know, you can have two kind of lumpy populations here as long as you clearly state that. The source of your data is described, so if you did a convenient sample on campus as well as a voluntary sample on your Facebook, you'll mention both of those. The quantity of data collected is appropriate. If you come to my office, I will be using a sample size calculator, but in general, we know that we need a sample size of at least 30 in order for the central limit theorem to you know, apply kind of strongly. So that's what I'm recommending for anything with a mean. If you have two populations, you'll need 30 for both populations. And anything with proportions, the bigger the better. If you're doing something in Unit 5 with Topic 1, testing a claim about two categorical variables, you're going to need a big enough sample size so that you have you know, enough successes and failures that you would have at least 5 in each cell. So that may not make sense right away, but basically if you're doing categorical data, you're always going to need to collect more, but it's usually easier data to collect and analyze for, I'd say, in general. The variable type is described. This is where you talk about categorical, numeric, continuous. If it's continuous, you're going to say if it's discrete or interval, or discrete or continuous, as well as interval or ratio. So you're going to go back to topic Unit 1 on this one. And then your raw data needs to be included somewhere. If it's really a lot of data, just say data available upon request. But for mostly everybody, you should be able to have it included on the back of your project or emailed in as a file if you're uploading your project presentation as a video. So next is the graphs and descriptive statistics. There's going to be two separate kind of families of data here. One for categorical data and the other one for numerical data. So in general, the numerical data is going to be box plots and histograms, and the categorical data will be bar graphs and pie charts in general. If you're doing regression, you're going to have a scatter plot. Appropriate summary statistics are calculated. So your summary statistics for a proportion will be things like your sample proportions. So your p-hat for males and your p-hat for females. If you are only doing proportion data, you don't need a mean and standard deviation because it's categorical data. So technically it's yes, no, or, you know, male, female, whatever. It's not going to be something that you can have mean and standard deviation on. If you're doing numerical data, you will have the mean and standard deviation at least. 5-number summary may be handy, but mean and standard deviation are the absolute minimum that you would need. And then obviously they all need to be correct. So the next part is your inferential statistics portion, and this is where you perform your hypothesis test. So you're going to do steps 1 through 7, but I personally prefer that you don't label them 1 through 7 because this is pretty unique to my class that I call them 1 through 7. It's not incorrect, but it's not something that someone else would understand either. So just make sure that you are doing steps 1 through 7, but you don't necessarily need to label them. If you are doing a Unit 5 project, you will not have a confidence interval for most of your topics. So you may have adjusted residuals or something else similar for this. So whatever your step 7 is, you're going to be doing your 1 through 7 here. You need, if you're drawing a picture on your paper, you're going to need to draw a picture. So for example, you may need to draw a normal distribution, and I will show you how to include that. Nothing should be hand drawn at all, except for maybe every once in a while a P hat is kind of hard to show you how to do. Um, but I'll show you how to do that. But nothing more than just a little symbol can be labeled by hands. So your discussions and your conclusion, a lot of people leave off this last one right here. So make sure that you are going through the rubric as you're doing your project. So the conclusion is clearly addressed. So I would say, the result of the two population mean test had a p-value of, so just like you're writing a paper, you would kind of re-say what you've done. So I would probably start this off with the researcher was interested in determining if Chicago had a lower average wind speed than the state of Wyoming. This was done by performing a two population mean test. The p-value result was blah, 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 which meant a conclusion that, and then say what your conclusion is. So when it says appropriate generalizations are made with supporting evidence, this is how we use a p-value to determine whether we support or reject our claim, and then our confidence interval or our post hoc test, whichever test you're doing, that will be the basis of determining by how much. So you should never just use the point estimate alone, your sample result, because that doesn't bring into account the wiggle room that we'd have going from a sample to a census. So your overall impression, the poster needs to be organized. Your poster is visually appealing and shows effort. So I would say most people usually get around an 8 on this, but I mean this has gone down pretty low to maybe a 3 or 4 for just a few posters throughout the whole time I've been doing this project, but in general they're usually very good looking. This has nothing to do at all with any content at all. It's just, looking at it, is it professional looking? And I guess this is kind of subjective because this is completely up to me. And then lastly, your oral presentation. It needs to be prepared, accurate, and thorough. And then you need to answer questions by instructor, student, or others. So I am the only person that is going to be seeing your video right now. I'm not going to post it on a forum for everyone to see. So you're just doing this for me. In the syllabus, it does state that your work maybe have your name removed and then be used for assessment of the college. And this will be done, but it won't have your name on it at all. And usually when there's actual students' faces, they'll wait a few semesters. So this will never be seen by another student. It may be seen by faculty in a few years, but in general, this is just for me. I don't share this at all. So this is if you make a video and send it to me. If you use your cell phone or whatever, that will be good enough because your oral presentation is supposed to be 2 to 3 minutes. If your presentation is longer than 3 minutes, you are saying more than you need to say. Part of it is being concise and saying what's important, and just that's all. I always know when someone hasn't prepared in advance because they will always go too long. So I know that kind of sounds the opposite, but you'll end up knowing your project really well. And so you have to actually get down, okay, what is important to share? You don't need to tell me your test statistic, but you do need to tell me what kind of tests you run and your p-value. So the due date of the project is going to be May 5th at 11:55 p.m. So this is the last Thursday of the semester. So this is our last day of regular work and class on the 6th. So you need to have this into me by midnight on that Thursday. If you are doing this as an on-campus appointment, then you need to just send me an email and schedule an appointment with me. It should take 5 minutes from start to finish. Even including, I will ask you some kind of question. So I'll say, what in the future could you improve on this with this specific thing? I'm very, very strict on the project. If you are not done with the project by 11:55, then it's no exceptions at all. I've never had anyone in the previous semester ever have a late submission that received any credit. So I'm very strict on this one. The projects need to be done. I want them to be graded by the time that you are completed with your final exam. So I like to get that grade and have that feedback back right away. So this is exactly what I'm going to be using to grade your project. I will put comments on this and send it in to you. So that way you'll know, why you actually scored the points you did in here. your conclusion, the thing I said, it's easy to forget, or is forgot pretty often. The shortcomings or suggestions to improvement. This is really important. This is going to be half of the points for this one, because you want to say, well, this was a convenient sample for the researchers' Facebook friends. It would have been stronger to include, a more solid sampling method. Sample size can be mentioned, but in general, you should have more than just those two things. So you should really say what kind of improvements you can make in the future, especially if you're trying to generalize to a bigger population. So a convenience sample is very dangerous of doing that because your Facebook friends are your friends, and they're probably going to have similar characteristics. So you may also mention some other things that have specifically to do with the actual test, and maybe something about your assumptions. So you need a little bit more meat here than just your sampling method, although most people will probably do a convenient sample. And so that's definitely something that needs to be discussed, but it can't be the only thing. So you have to have at least something else here that makes this a little bit stronger. So the next thing I wanted to do is talk a little bit in detail about these sample projects, and then I'm going to post another video for Google Forms. So this first one was a regression project, and someone was looking to see if the longer the lifespan, the lower the average, the more the weight, the less the lifespan on the dog was. So they ended up doing this exactly, how we had done this in class. They included their raw data on here. I'm not sure if I necessarily would have done that, but I mean, this fits really nicely in here, so there's nothing wrong with that. So suggestions for improvement was kind of separated from this. So this was their conclusion. This was their introduction. So the rest of these in general, I'm just kind of going to slowly scan through them. This is, again, there's not saying that they're completely correct. They're just a variety of different tests. I'm going to mention how to get an image, not quite like this. It's probably not how I would do that per se, because that's a very specific program. So, I mean, this person's introduction, their hypotheses, I mean, this one was a really strong one in general. This conclusion was maybe a little bit on the longer side for the average project, but was very, very thorough. So their graphs are in color. The Stat Lab does print in color on campus, but in general, you're going to have to print them out in color somehow. So this one I think is a pretty fair length here for these two. But this project kind of seems like it's missing something. So who tips more? And this was actually doing a mean of percentages because they figured out their tip for each check in percentage. So what I would do if you need to make a normal distribution is I would Google blank normal distribution, and you'll notice the ones that I use in class. So if you go to images, you're going to get a bunch of these. This is the one that I tend to use. I don't know, I just like this one. So I would copy this, and I usually use the program Paint. So I would crop out that bottom line. And so then let's say your t-score is, 2.2. So that would be somewhere around here. And then you would fill in that tail if it was right-tailed. It could be left-tailed. That doesn't work out because this line down here has got a little gap in it. So I'm actually oddly familiar with this image. If you fill that in, I think it works. Yeah. So this is the image that I recommend just because that bottom axis isn't always filled in. Some of them have little gaps up here, and that makes it a lot worse. If you need a blank chi-square distribution, you would do the same exact thing. So this is the one that I usually use right here. I believe that this is like the other one. If you want to fill this in. Oh, no, it doesn't. But this is also really common too, because this line isn't just a line curve that was drawn. It was actually from another image. So they probably did, like a a loose copy on this one. But if this is something that you wanted to shade in by hand, the rest of it, that's something that I would probably be fine with. So let's say this was your test statistic here. Put a line up, and then it will stop at that point. So this is in general a summary of the project. So again, if you want to change your project, or you don't know what you want to do your project on yet, feel free to check out this what can you do your project on document. And if you're really unsure, feel free to send me an email, and we can talk further about what your hobbies and interests are, and sometimes we talk about people's jobs. So during the project time, I send and answer lots and lots of emails. So please don't feel like you're emailing me something that's very vague. Sometimes I'll respond back and just give you a hint, but in general, you should be maybe emailing me back and forth a few times if you have any questions at all with the projects.